This is the Unit 2 Skill 4 video, the first part covering triangle congruence. Now that word congruence or congruent means the same, okay? So congruent triangles are identical in shape and size. So that's the first definition I'd like to write. What is a congruent triangle or congruent triangles? Okay, they are identical in shape and size. Okay, so for example, if I were to draw these two triangles, I'm going to try my best to make them the same shape and size. Okay, we know that each triangle has 3 sides and 3 angles, so kind of 6 total pieces. And we could label them like this, right? This side is congruent to this side. This bottom side is congruent to this bottom side. And this kind of longer side on the right is congruent to this one. Notice I used all different markings, okay? A single mark, a double mark, and the triple mark to show which sides were the congruent ones in each triangle. And then I could also do that with angles, okay? I could come down here to this angle at the bottom and maybe put one little arc, and then I could come to the angle at the top and put maybe a double arc to show that those two are the same, and then come down here to the bottom, maybe do a little triple arc, okay, to show that those two bottom left angles are congruent. So those are some of the markings that you will see as we start deciding if two triangles are congruent. Now, we can know that two triangles are congruent if we know certain patterns of these angles and sides being congruent. We don't need to have all of these marked, okay? That would be a lot of information. So I'm going to write that you can know that two, and here's a triangle symbol, okay, with an apostrophe S, so you can know two triangles are congruent. Now here's the congruent symbol. We'll use this starting tomorrow. It's like an equal sign with a little squiggly on top, okay? So you can know that two triangles are congruent if you know certain patterns of angles and or sides are congruent. Okay, so for the rest of this video, we're just looking at the 4 cases, those 4 specific patterns of angles and sides to show that two triangles are congruent. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a chart. I'm going to move this out of the way. And let's label this cases for congruent triangles. And make a chart with 4 spots. Make it large enough so that you can be drawing some triangles in each of those boxes. Now the first scenario, let's draw these 2 triangles. We want them to look as identical as possible, okay, but they don't need to be perfect. Now let's say that we're given this bottom left angle is congruent to this bottom left angle. This side is congruent to this side. And this top angle is congruent to this top angle. Okay, so in order, we know an angle, then a side, and then an angle is congruent to this angle, side, angle. That is all we need to prove that these 2 triangles are identical. They are congruent. Okay, if those 2 angles are the same measure and the side in between them, this is the angle, side, angle case. Okay? So if that's the information you're given and you were asked how you know these 2 triangles are congruent, you would say ASA, or angle, side, angle. Let's look at a second scenario. Here's 2 other triangles. Again, try to draw them as close to the same as possible for your notes. Okay, and let's mark some congruent pieces. Let's say that this little acute angle down here is the same in each. And this angle on the bottom right with double marks. And this side here off to the right. Okay, if we labeled the pieces that we know here in order, okay, you name it in the closest order. So I'm not going to notice that we have like an unknown angle here. We don't have any information about these 2 angles or about this side, right? There's no markings. If there's no markings on like 2 pieces in a row, an angle and a side, then label around the other side, okay? Notice I know an angle, another angle, and a side, okay? Same here. It's the angle, angle, side. And that's the name of this case. Now, you might also see this as side, angle, angle, right? If you just labeled it the other direction, SAA. But typically, we'll always do a final labeling as angle, angle, side. Okay? So this is the same as side, angle, angle. Okay, so if you know those 3 pieces of information in order, you know the 2 triangles are congruent as well. Let's look at a third scenario. Okay, again, try to draw 2 triangles that look the same. And here's how we'll label these. I'm going to mark this side and this side as congruent. Okay, notice, triangles can be flipped around, one upside down. They can still be congruent. Okay, I'm going to mark this other side and this one as congruent, and the angle in between them. So now if we label those pieces in order, we've got a side, an angle, and a side. And if I label in the same order, starting with that single dash, side, angle, side. Okay, that's the third case for congruent triangles is if you have a side, angle, and then a side. Okay, so those two triangles have to be identical if those two side lengths are the same and the angle in between them. And the final case is this. I'm going to make these two triangles. And I'm going to label them with all three sides marked congruent like this. Okay, so it's side, 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 congruent to side, side, side. These two triangles have to be identical. There is no way to connect those three congruent sides with different angles with each other, and so they have to be the same triangle. And so we just call this the side, side, side case. Okay, so as you're looking at triangles, and if you're asked to label why they're congruent, you look for one of these four cases. Think about how you would label the congruent pieces that you know. If it's like the first box, where it is an angle to a side to an angle. The second box, an angle to a side. The third box, a side to an angle and a side. Or the fourth box, where all three sides, side, 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 are congruent to each other. And this concludes this first video on triangle congruence, Skill 4.